We're live, okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Lunenburg Finance Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, September 9th, 2021, and I would like to call this meeting to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over Lunenburg Public Access Channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is also provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please join the Zoom app using meeting ID 83677082698, or from a telephone, dial toll-free 888-475-4499, and enter that same webinar ID 83677082698, and then pound. If you are not registered with Zoom, you will be asked for your name and an email address. No participant ID is needed. Just press for telephone. Just press pound when asked. Telephone users may dial *9 to ask to speak. Computer users may use the raised hand feature when you speak. Please note that the available Zoom option is for the convenience of the public. If any technical difficulties were to occur with Zoom, the meeting will continue. If you wish to continue to participate, you must come to this location. We are at Lunenburg Town Hall in Main Street in Lunenburg. The agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. With that, would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any announcements? I do have an announcement. I neglected to mention at our last meeting that after several email exchanges between myself and the chair of the school committee, we have arrived at a date of October 28th, which is our regular second meeting of October, to host Tracy O'Connell Novick, who is from the Mass Association of School Committees, who will be talking with us about Chapter 70 and our situation with respect to Chapter 70. That will be a joint meeting with the school committee, so we will invite the members of the school committee for that meeting. It will be held here, and obviously it'll be televised and Zoomed and all that. I will also be extending a email and telephonic invite to our legislators and welcome them to attend that meeting as well. Is there any public comment from the board? Hearing none. Is there any public comment from the public? Hearing none. Town Manager Finance Director report. Mrs. Lemieux.
So I don't have much to report tonight.
That's great. There's a game on at 8:20.
So. Let's see, things that we went over at the select board's meeting that you may be interested in. There's going to be some changes in the assessor's records on certain town properties that were listed as conservation incorrectly. There's no deed or town meeting vote that could be found that deemed it conservation. I'm still working on 925 Mass Ave with Department of Environmental Protection through possible funding through their leaking underground storage tank program. So hopefully they have a meeting September 14th about funding various federal funds for that they'd be closing out. So hopefully hear some good news on that. The comment letter to 40B went into the state last Thursday.
Congratulations.
Yes. So hopefully they recognize everything that we've stated. I think we provided a really good, strong argument of our concerns about the project. I applied for a $10,000 risk management grant through our insurance carrier that would transition our email and platform, moving to Microsoft Office 365. So that would not only be email, it would be the whole suite for all our staff. And I'm also planning on applying for the Community Compact IT grant for IT equipment upgrades, and that is due October 1st. So that funding is up to $200,000. And the Council on Aging Director applied for a $20,000 community enrichment grant through the Community Foundation of North Central Mass that would go for the redesign of the patio behind the senior center to make it ADA compliant. And I think that's essentially it. I was at a meeting today there were representatives from MMA. They talked about and gave legislative updates and budget updates. The state closed out with a $4 billion surplus, which the governor just filed the supplemental budget bill. It included replenishing the state's stabilization fund that they had planned on drawing down from, as well as putting support funding towards the unemployment fund. The MMA asked to amend that to include an additional $200 million towards Chapter 90 as well. And another update on that, the state auditor is looking at transportation, doing a transportation study, which also includes Chapter 90, how that funding is allocated. So that formula right now is miles of road, population, and unemployment, all different percentages. That's how it's weighted. So looking at that formula as well. A lot of rural towns have, they may not have high populations, but they have a lot of roads and bridges and culverts and projects that they're not seeing what they think is their fair share.
What would the study entail?
I'm not entirely sure. That was just the headline. So,
Common attractions.
yes, yeah. The state has $5.3 billion in ARPA funding. So the governor has put together a proposal for $2.9 billion of that funding for a short-term proposal, which they're going through all the meetings on that right now. So that includes housing, infrastructure, water and sewer, economic development, environmental, and this could mean, it will mean a positive impact for the municipalities, but could influence our plan for ARPA funding. So if there's matching funds for different, water and sewer, broadband, environmental projects, we will want to take that into account in our plan as well. So that would just be a footnote that we're going to stay flexible in how we're going to look at this funding. And I think that's mostly it. They talked about different, the redistricting process that they're currently undergoing. The Votes Act, which is same-day registration, which is, that's a hot topic right now. Cannabis policy, which would, I got to talk to our legislators more about that, because that could impact, we have a meeting where our community host meeting with their current application, Uma Flowers, is on September 28th. But after that, we'll be doing the negotiations for host community agreement with them.
Is that Now, there have been two that have come up. One is the Mass
Greenleaf.
Ave one, and the other one is Donnelly's, right?
Greenleaf was the first application, and they didn't meet our zoning requirements.
Okay, so that one's essentially done?
Yeah, we haven't heard back from them
Okay.
after that was,
That's the one near Mackey.
yes, yep. But,
So the one that's pending is the one on Summer Street?
yes, and they did a survey of the property and are outside the 250,
From that residence?
according to their survey.
What would be the policy changes that they're looking at, do you know?
That's
Or
what
is
I need to talk to
Oh,
our
okay.
legislators about, yeah. I believe it comes down to state control versus local control. And, because what the CCC is going to require through their process, and whether it limits us on how we structure our host community agreement. How much funding we can request through that. So, yep, and not that I think this will affect us, but a sports betting bill right now too.
Yeah.
Some municipalities, I think.
I do have a couple of questions on some of the items that you brought up. On the Office 365, and you and I have discussed this briefly on the phone, but we've got a lot of email addresses in our Lunenburg Online domain, and I know that the school department is particularly oriented toward Google. The town has other needs, and we also have a lot of volunteers like ourselves who have Lunenburg Online email addresses. Would Office 365 licenses go to every person on the docket, or how do you envision that?
There'd be tiers. So staff and people who need the full suite, obviously, that for staff, that would get those licenses. And then depending on what type of board, like select board, planning board, finance, people who use that email and share those resources frequently would likely get the full suite as well. But a lot of committees don't utilize email, even
Yeah.
town email.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of that has to be shaken out, obviously. Okay. For the state closeout surplus money and the supplemental bill, you mentioned unemployment. Are they looking at doing some kind of supplement to small business unemployment insurance, or are you aware of any of those details?
Yeah, they didn't provide any details on that.
Because I've had a lot of small business owners tell me recently that their unemployment insurance has gone through the roof, over the course of the last year. So,
I think it was fully depleted through,
yeah,
so I think that's what they meant by replenishing it, supporting it.
okay. Any other questions for the town manager? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so our next item is a discussion with the library director. We have Muir on Zoom, so I would ask him to unmute himself, if he can. I don't know if you can, Muir. If not, I'll try to unmute you. I have to ask to unmute you. Okay, that's not good. We just had him. I know it works.
Two on it.
Good evening, everyone.
Ah, there we go. All right. Can you hear us okay, Muir?
Muir, can you hear us?
Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Muir?
I can.
All right.
Although your Zoom mic is muted still.
Yeah, well, because we've got microphones in here, so we're coming through PAC. And I will turn on my camera just so you don't feel like you're talking to nobody. But I don't think PAC has the ability to
I
run.
can hear you.
I'm sorry?
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
I'm watching on Facebook too, so I think I've got my
All right, well, we got
forget problem.
more cameras than we know what to do with now, so we're good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Mira, as I believe you did this with us a couple of years ago. So I want to welcome you to our informal conversation with the Finance Committee. We've done this for a couple of meetings now. We've had Public Safety in, we've had Council on Aging in. Who else have we had?
Police, fire.
DPW. And today we have yourself and the Land Use Director, so thank you both for joining us. I'd like to give you the floor, really just to give us kind of an update on what's going on with the library and anything that you're seeing on your radar in terms of things that might be out of the ordinary or things that we ought to be thinking about for the upcoming FY23 budget season.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to join you. We had a good informal discussion the last time we did it 2 years ago, and I think it really helps out with the process later on when we do this informally to begin with. So it's been an interesting period of time since we last met, and the library is doing pretty well. We just finished up a recarpeting project, which was on the capital plan. So the library looks great. It's probably as good as it's looked since 2005 when it opened. And hopefully you and everyone at home will come and visit us soon. Kind of entering beginning of the school year season, which for us tends to get a little busy after the lull between summer reading and the school year. So it's a good time to meet with you guys. We're also hopefully finishing up our strategic plan, our first long-range strategic plan in at least 10 years. And I think that's going to be a great tool for us for many different reasons. I think that it's an ambitious plan, so we have high aspirations, and although it's not official yet, I think it's pretty much there. So one of the big things that we keep hearing is access to the library and making it more convenient, making access easier. Whether it's through more digital means, which we have done over the last year and a half with the pandemic happening. Kind of been forced to do some of that, and some of that can easily continue, and some we need to plan how to continue it. Targeting kind of new populations, growing in the growth of Lunenburg over the recent past and anticipated in the future is another thing to plan for. And for the library, trying to expand our user base. So we've got a pretty popular library and lots of people come and use it, but not everybody in town. And one of the things that we aspire to is to increase the kind of proportion of residents who are actually engaging with and using the library. So that's, I think, a big aspiration, because probably a lot of the people who don't use the library do it because they don't expect to need a library, and so that's a big barrier to break down, but certainly something we're going to go for. So yeah, big strategic plan. I'm excited about that. I think the behavior of library use is another thing that I would highlight as important. Obviously, with the limitations during the pandemic of accessing the building and the collection, we did see a drop off in circulation of physical items over the last fiscal year and the tail end of the 2 fiscal years ago, which would be expected. For FY21, it actually wasn't quite as low as I thought it would be, basically being closed most of the year. We did do curbside pickups for many months starting last fall, and then browsing appointments for a couple months as well, in the late winter to spring. But even with that, I think we only saw a drop off of 30 to 40% in physical circulation from the preceding year. So to me, it's surprisingly high. I think we'll see a return to those behaviors as things transition back to less limitations. Certainly, we're seeing some of that already. The other big component of that is our electronic usage, which we saw huge growth in the heart of the pandemic at the end of fiscal year 20. In the last 3 months of that fiscal year, we saw basically half a year's worth of or more even use of those ebooks and e-audio books that we offered to people. And that led to an increase in spending over FY21, which saw again, I think probably about a third again increase, basically equating to a doubling of usage of those resources over 2 fiscal years. And I would think that pattern is likely to continue. So increased spending on those resources, which have in the past been a really small proportion of our library materials expenditures. I would think that proportion would need to kind of increase.
So let me stop you right there, Mir, because I think that's an interesting topic and one that we've dwelled on a little bit here in the past around, the surprising cost of electronic materials in a library when compared to electronic materials that one might buy for themselves versus physical materials. Could you just, give us a ballpark in terms of what those numbers are as perhaps a percentage of your budget, and are there mechanisms to, buy more, get more, or, anything along those lines that might help us to manage those costs in the future if we believe that they are going to continue to rise?
So just comparing materials costs, physical, and I'll concentrate mostly on books. Physical books typically have a list price for hardcovers that are new of $25 to $30 because we're a part of a buying cooperative in Massachusetts. That group has negotiated a discount of somewhere around 40 to 45% off list price for those items. We typically pay for some processing, covering of books, and labeling of materials for cataloging purposes. And so that's a nominal cost, usually probably less than $1 an item. And so that compares to an electronic book, which basically what we're doing is buying a license. There's several different types of license. There's a one copy, one user license that is analogous to a physical item. One person can borrow that copy at a time, and they have to return it before the next person can. There are also metered access, which can be similar in one copy, one use, but you're paying for a certain number of checkouts, and only one person can do that at once. There's also another version of metered access where you can have simultaneous use. Again, you're buying a certain number of uses when you're purchasing, and then there are other less popular licensing formats as well. Typically, electronic books cost the library more in the range of $50 to $100 per item, and that's just how library purchasing works. The best way to leverage resources is kind of group buying, and we already do that. The Lunenburg Library is part of the CW Mars network, which is central and western Massachusetts, more than 140 libraries, and we share basically a catalog of those electronic materials, and that's the way to best. Because I have an audience at home here, and that's the best way to leverage resources, is to be a part of a network that purchases together, and so those prices are are set dependent on that grouping, and we're there. We're actually 3 years ago, I think now, the CW Mars network is part of the million checkout flow. So in 1 year, the entire network checked out more than 1 million items, which makes it a rather large consortium. So that buying power is definitely what I would call maxed out. We also buy titles in addition to what the network buys, so that Lunenburg residents kind of get first dibs at those extra titles. And that's really the increase in spending that we're seeing. Is we're spending more on those items to better respond to the needs of Lunenburg. Unfortunately, those prices are unlikely to get any better. The last time we had a discussion was kind of was when there was a big hullabaloo over the publishing industry and what they were doing in respects to libraries, and kind of undercutting, cutting the legs out from under libraries and their ability to buy by embargoing was what they were calling it, embargoing certain titles for a period of time where libraries can purchase them right after they've been released. And that came to an end because of the pandemic, for the most part. I don't know what will happen as we exit the other side of that event. What that means for the publishing industry as far as ebooks, it's pretty tough to forecast that, but definitely a good thing to think about. Did that answer your question, Peter?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. Do you have more that you want to cover, or would it be better to turn this over to the committee? I'm sure there'd be a few questions, but I don't know. I don't know if you have a checklist. Okay.
Yeah. I think the other point that I would make before whatever questions you guys have, I'd be happy to answer. Knowing there's likely growth in town. We're anticipating trying to grow the usage of the library. The one big consideration that I'd mention now is staffing, likely needing to expand in some form. As this is an informal discussion, I don't want to go too far into making those plans, and I don't think the library board of trustees is ready to make an official request of any sort as far as specifics, but that would be something that I would anticipate coming down the line. Probably not. And at some point, there are a couple of ways I see it possibly happening, but staffing is always the big expense for the library too. So something like 2/3 of our budget goes to staffing and costs. So.
Are you looking at all to extend your hours? Are you looking?
Sorry, I missed that.
No, are you looking at all to extend your hours, Fridays or?
Yep, definitely. That is part of the discussion. Yes, that's one of the things that during the strategic planning process we've heard, kind of time and time again, more hours. So we'll see exactly how it shakes out, but I would anticipate expanding our hours in some form, trying different times, something along those lines. Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess just back to the strategic plan, when will that be, is it already on the street, or, is it published somewhere in draft form?
Did you hear that question, Mir? You guys muted us. There we go. Okay. I think we got muted accidentally. Mir,
Yeah, I didn't hear you there, sorry.
okay.
Yeah, so the question was just, is that strategic plan online in some kind of draft form, or?
It is not available as of now. We have our monthly trustee meeting that's coming Thursday, next Thursday. I would anticipate it being available after that. And I'd be happy to send it directly to Peter to share with your group if you'd like. That would make things easy for you guys. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, can you hint at, I mean, it's an open meeting, right? And they're an open body, at some of the financial drivers that might be in there?
Well, I think some of the goals, kind of the library functioning as a community hub. That's an idea that creates a lot of tendrils of influence and effect, and exactly what the actions we try to accomplish will influence the financial piece of things. Funding for staffing and additional hours, I think is something that's definitely a part of it. Access, as we discussed, whether it's ebooks and e-audiobooks, it's our research databases, things like Ancestry, so that people can access that from their homes. Other resources that we've kind of initiated, like Canopy, which is a streaming video service that's been pretty popular so far. Funding for things like that for collections, funding for programming that reaches out to those underserved or new service populations that we're either not engaging enough with or that we don't really get to engage with through programming, partnerships, so support for that. Children's and teen areas are always important. The way that we serve those groups is a focus as well. And I think it's not really in the strategic plan, but the capital planning discussion, that season is about to start up again, and our HVAC system is probably something for that side of things that is a higher priority than the last time we talked. Just seeing increased in maintenance there. So really those are kind of the big hitters, I'd say, Chris.
Okay. Has there been any discussion on things like with a changing way that people are working, remote work, people working from home? They kind of could lose access to technical journals or legal journals or other sorts of things that the library probably didn't typically care about, I guess, maybe because business would have that. Has there been any look at expanding those types of resources?
Certainly, we're always happy to look at things. Online journals in general are even more exorbitantly priced than our electronic books. So that would be I would anticipate that being a really large expense to do any of that. But I haven't specifically looked at business resources. It is a nice idea. I'd be happy to, if you have some ideas, we could maybe discuss that at some point and swing by the library and talk to me about it.
Okay.
Do some research.
Okay.
It might be something that the CW Mars network we could bring to the network and suggest and use some of that kind of group buying power to make it actually happen. But I'd have to know some more specifics. Certainly in our programming, we've been trying to address some of the needs of job searchers, people who haven't been entered into a job search for years and have been forced into that situation in the last year, and other things like that.
Okay.
We're always happy to talk different ideas too. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Muir, you mentioned HVAC systems. Over the past few years, we've done green communities projects. You just completed the carpets, and there's been some facilities projects. Other than the HVAC with a 16-year-old building, do you yourself, and I know this comes under facilities and DPW, but you're in the building every day.
Right.
Do you and the library trustees see anything big coming down the road that will start to be needing to be looked at and or addressed other than HVAC? Or are we in pretty good shape overall for the short term anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with the DPW on the building exterior. I don't think there's a major issue, but certainly some of the regular maintenance and upkeep and repainting and some of the concrete panels that were used are showing their age. But that's relatively small, something I would anticipate that we can take care of probably in our annual budget, just as one of our projects. That's really the big one as far as the facility, the HVAC first, and outside of the HVAC, that building exterior can do a few things. We did redo the carpet. Some of the other maintenance is easily taken care of regularly with the DPW budget.
Have you been able to keep your IT hardware up to date, or, is it where you need it to be for the future?
We're in pretty good shape. We try to do fairly regular, try to upgrade some of our hardware, each year, whether that's one machine or several. There are a couple of pieces that we could upgrade. That should be the next in that priority list. But for the most part, we're in pretty good shape. That is something that changes pretty quickly, but as long as we stay on top of it, we can take care of that stuff. Good question, though.
Have you got pretty good bandwidth going on there? I know that you're on a different network than the town, I believe, but
Yeah.
I do know that my son started doing Boys and Girls Club this year, and this power hour thing is quite the thing that you
Oh,
get
man.
going on, where you've got
Yeah.
upwards
What
of
a crowd
50
you got
kids
in
in
there,
there,
too.
50 kids in there at a time. So I can
Yeah,
imagine there's a lot going on.
Yeah, definitely. Our bandwidth is quite good. What we do is we've got a data line through CW Mars, and I think it's 30 megabits, which is pretty short. It's up to 30, and it's more than we need during the day. But if we get 40, 50, 60, 70 teens doing homework after school, I haven't looked yet, but I'd be interested to see what the bandwidth usage was this week during Power Hour. I think we're probably in pretty good shape. That's something that our annual membership, assessment fee to the network, that's included in there. So it's something that we could increase if we needed more bandwidth. But it's been great so far since we've done that, and we switched over most of the devices in the building to that line from the Comcast line, which generally was always in and out of service. Anytime they were doing work in the area, the internet would be off. So our public access computers are now over on that CW Mars network line, and that's dependable. we've got a few, like the HVAC system and the security system, where people need to access it from remotely to check up on it on off hours. And those things are still on the Comcast line, but nearly everything is now over on that dependable fiber line. So I think we're in pretty good shape right now.
One last question from me. I believe this year you guys finally bit the bullet and did away with late fees or something along those lines. And
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can comment on that and how that's
Sure.
worked out.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, we started that process kind of as an experiment in the children's area, and removed so there are two, when we talk about fees associated with library materials, there are two types. One's overdue for materials that are late, and others are, the other side of things are replacement fees. And what we're talking about here is late fees, overdue fees. And so we removed those fees from children's materials. Typically kids are the ones that, are dependent on other people to get to the library to return things on time, and would have to give up their allowance, if they even have any, to pay for those fees in order to continue to use the library. And so all of that, coupled with knowing that our kids are incredibly important, and the ones we want to, or a really important service group for us, we want to make sure that they can access materials whenever they need to. We tried that as an experiment and gathered data, and it seemed to be working well. And through the pandemic, with all the confusion and limitations and access issues, that we were checking things in with a mode on our catalog system that wipes fines as items were checked in, and that experience kind of led to the trustees deciding that we want to move in the direction of removing all overdue fees. And there may be a few exceptions for specific materials. We've got a telescope that people check out. That may be something that is just too kind of expensive to not have that red flag for people, that you got to be really careful and get it back on time. So there may be a few exceptions, but for the most part, the direction we want to finish going is removing those overdue late fees. Over the past decade or so, the amount of revenue that was being generated with those fees really kind of came pretty close to disappearing. I think the pandemic was part of it, but FY20, I think, was we had like $2,300 in revenue from late fees, and that includes the replacement fees that are not going anywhere. Obviously, if someone damages or loses an item, we've got to try to recoup some of that expense of replacing it. But so that revenue really over time has kind of decreased lately. So coupling that minimal impact with the expectation that there will be some library users returning to use the library who've not used it in a long time because of their fees, I think that's a really positive impact. It cuts down on the amount of staff time that gets used to communicate about these fees, what they're for, what the book might be, helping people to know those details, to try and find it, having multiple conversations about the same 10 cents. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Just, it's a time that could be used in a much better, much more efficient fashion on another thing, another interaction. And it really removes a really negative experience for a lot of people, which creates some goodwill, but again, is a positive feedback loop. The other aspect of things of this conversation is that we can also, for those people that do feel really guilty or have a conscience about being late, there is the option to donate to either directly to the library or the friends of the library. And often what other libraries have experienced as far as that is the people who are most able to pay such a fee are still going to be paying those fees, and maybe even more generous when there's no strict enumeration of value attached to their guilt. And so they may give $10, or they may give a whole dollar when they would have only owed 10 or 20 cents. And what other libraries have seen going in the direction of fine-free is actually an increase in revenue just through those donations. So we'll certainly, as we continue to communicate about that aspect of operations, leave that option open for people, and we'll see how it goes. I'm sure the people of Lunenburg are at least as generous as most others across the nation and world, and we'll see what happens.
Good.
But I think it's a grand gesture from the trustees, and certainly I support it, and I think it'll be good for Lunenburg, and I don't think it will have really negative financial impact on any of our operations.
Okay. Anybody, any other questions? Comments? No? All right, Mira, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you this
guys. It was
evening,
great
and
to talk to you.
thanks to PAC for making this work. We have,
Yeah, thank you.
I think this is the first time we've had an extended conversation over Zoom at the Finance Committee. So this is good.
Cool.
All right.
It went smoothly.
All right, thank you.
Take care.
Take care. All right, with no further ado, Mr. Bernie. Please step into the witness chair.
I didn't do it. I have an alibi. How are you guys tonight?
Good evening.
Good evening. So, I don't have nearly as much exciting news as the library does. For the most part, our FY22 is looking pretty stable. The one big shakeup, we have a potential retirement coming before the end of this fiscal year. The conservation administrator is certainly pondering it. I think it's probably more than a ponderance. So going into FY22, we'd probably be looking at replacing that position. And whether it's a like-for-like replacement or whether there's some ability to look at bringing in part-time staff to support that position, to increase their ability to do some of the things that the town has looked for them to do, is a conversation the town manager and I have started having. There's many more conversations to be had, and obviously a lot of it's going to be budget-driven. The administrator now does both clerical and technical work, and as you know, clerical work, especially minutes, can be all-consuming at times, and so where they're putting out 2 meetings a month, I think they've had double-digit hearings several times over the last couple of years at hearings, so those minutes start to become voluminous, and dealing with that while trying to do regular site inspections, keep up with enforcement, and then to look at being proactive about grant opportunities or management of the thousands of acres of conservation land we have becomes sort of an afterthought, because all of these other things are time sensitive, and so I think there's some opportunities there. I think there's also some significant operational thoughts that need to be put into it from a management perspective. But otherwise, the rest of the staff, I sort of intend or understand to be fairly stable going forward. No pending retirements, no exorbitant need for additional staff time. There aren't capital projects or capital items that are beyond normal budgetary things that would be coming forward that I see as shocking to the budget.
Okay. Master plan, my favorite topic.
Complicated.
Okay.
Expensive. And I think that there's conversations that need to be had with the planning board before I really get too far afield. We have put out a an RFP with no responses. So there's some discussion that the board needs to kind of have and determine what their position is before I really give you more information.
Okay.
It is something that the board is interested in, is something that's a priority for them. So perhaps you'll see a capital article coming for additional funding for that. We have about $43,000 from the original capital article. We spent a little less than $7,000 doing the population study, which is a cornerstone for that whole process because the numbers that we had were so out of whack. And when the new numbers land, they'll be willing, the Donahue Institute is willing to update that study by plugging in the actual 2020 numbers and using those same projection methods to give us more precise numbers for the next 10 and 20 years. But I don't suspect there'll be a massive difference because they were using fairly accurate estimations from the American Community Survey. So.
When are you going to get the detailed crosstabs from the census?
That's a great question. I don't know. They've started dropping information. It starts at the state level. Locality data is generally going to be age, sex, race, most likely, which is really what we'll need. I haven't seen it. I haven't looked in the last week or two. But normally a place like Lunenburg is kind of down here for rolling that information out just because, we're sub 15,000 people and they really concentrate on the more metropolitan areas and the more regional statistics because that's what a lot of funding mechanisms and other grant opportunities and statistical things rely on, their metropolitan statistical areas. So, I would hope before the end of this calendar year, we would see at least the summary file 1 data, which is generally demographic stuff, which is what most people will look at and say, oh, yay, census. It could be, and it's probably a little different now because of the way they've been doing the census this time around, but when you get down into the really nitty-gritty, like the summary file 3 stuff, in 2010, I was probably 2013, 2014 before some of that came out for smaller communities. I think that's probably less likely. I think we're probably on 18-month, 2-year wait, but it could be even faster.
So
What's the delay in getting it out?
I think it's the processing and the calculation of it.
Computers.
Well, it's also the government.
They have computers too.
They do. Their computers are older, though. Before, it used to be all paper. I mean, in 2010, all of it was submitted on paper. And now, a lot of it was still submitted on paper, but some of it was done digitally. So it's really just, it's such a massive undertaking that I think there's a lot of validation in the background that they go through to ensure that they're not putting out numbers that are skewed in some way.
The master plan process, I vaguely recall, and maybe you can help me out with some of the details, was we had put $50,000 to a phase
Correct.
of the master plan, and I believe, was that for last fiscal year or the current fiscal year?
That was pre-pandemic.
Right. So we just encumbered that money? Is that-
It's a capital item, so it has a 3-year shelf life.
Okay.
So we're coming up on needing to do something with it.
Yeah.
And the board will figure out exactly what they want to do, I would expect, at the next meeting or by the end of the month.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Just quickly going back to conservation, just so that I verify my memory. A few years back, we went from a full-time administrator and a part-time agent to a full-time administrator agent, and now we're looking to, or having discussions about a part-time agent, part-time clerical.
And
And I know it hasn't been set in stone.
yeah, no, what we used to have is we had a full-time clerical and a contract agent.
Okay.
So he was essentially a contractor. He wasn't an employee of the town in the strictest sense. If I had my druthers, I think the agent would be a full-time position. I think there's enough work between the regulatory aspect and some of the things that the Open Space Committee and the Conservation Commission have put forward as what they would like to see. And the clerical, I think, could probably function as a part-time position. Again, I think there's still a lot of discussion to be had about how that would shake out.
Okay. I was just trying to be sure I had it in my mind as
Yeah,
to what the transition's been over the past 10 years or so.
And if it really came down to one or the other, I would say the full-time technical expertise is much more important than, say, splitting two part-time positions. I don't think that would serve the town in the same way.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Hopefully I get you out of here. Well, we're not far off. Okay. Old business, special town meeting update and timeline. Madam Town Manager, do you have anything to report on that?
You have all the timeline. Is that?
Well, as the timeline, I guess the better question is, has the timeline changed since the last time you circulated a timeline?
No, no, everything stayed the same.
Okay. And are there articles pending at this point, or?
There are a few draft articles so far, the typical, the budget amendment article, prior year's expense article. Right now, the clerical and the fire articles are on there. Nothing's been finalized, so I just put them on as, so they made the warrant, they can be pulled after if not needed. There's an article from the assessors. They're looking to increase the elderly abatement for single and married persons. It's currently $750, increase it to $1,000. They're coming to the select board's meeting Tuesday night to discuss that. The TCP Building Design Committee is putting forth three articles, and they're coming to the select board's meeting on Tuesday as well to discuss those. One update article and two funding articles. And I know there's other articles forthcoming, we just haven't received them.
Okay. Do you expect that you'll have a draft document in a couple of weeks at our next
Yeah.
meeting, or?
I can circulate a draft with the disclaimer that it will change.
Oh, yeah. But we're planning a public hearing for the 14th
Yes,
of
so-
October, so,
Yep.
we only
I
have
can
one
certainly
meeting between now and then.
send that out.
So,
Mhm.
okay.
And send updated versions as we get additional articles.
Okay. I'm just thinking out loud here. We did agree that the 14th would be a public hearing, so I need to coordinate with you about making sure that gets advertised or
Advertising.
whatever we need to do for that.
Yeah.
As a new chair, I have no idea if there's anything that I need to do, so.
Elaine does that for us.
Okay,
but-
all right, good. All right, any questions on town meeting?
We definitely having one. I mean, if there's like 6
Yes.
articles, we're gonna go forward with it.
Mhm. There'll be more than 6.
Okay.
Okay, new business, technology planning and investment opportunities. I don't know if it came up at our last meeting. You had told me just prior, but I don't think it was announced, but you had announced it at last week or the week before selectmen meeting that our technology director had resigned. As I had relayed to you via email last week, there was a couple of questions that came from board members about kind of the game plan with respect to technology. There's opportunity for investment through ARPA in our, technical infrastructure, I guess. You alluded to a little bit of that with respect to the, motion toward Office 365. a question that's continually come up in my 2-year tenure here is, what can we automate? Are there things that we can be investing in from a technology perspective that would ultimately save us money in the long term? But I don't feel like we've ever had a serious conversation about that. We've kind of kept up with the needs of the town as they've evolved, particularly through the pandemic. We've bought an awful lot of equipment. We've upgraded our network. We've done a lot of work, but there hasn't really been any sort of strategic articulation of where we're going with respect to technology. And my feeling is that we're at, with a personnel change, we're at an inflection point. And I know there are other board members that have opinions on this, but I'd just like to give you the opportunity to at least update us what you're thinking in terms of the timeline for replacing the technology director. Will it be a one-for-one replacement or that sort of thing?
I have nothing tonight to add to that. I thought this topic was on, I was open to receiving input on investments in technology and areas where the finance committee saw financial efficiencies.
I mean, I think efficiencies, or at least services, moving to a common ecosystem across the town would be beneficial. We talked about that before with like the multiple scheduling platforms and where is information posted one board to another board, one department to the other. So I'd like to see that. I was encouraged with the grant request for Office 365, not because I particularly like it, but it sounded like perhaps that was a move towards kind of a common platform. And if that can be done with us and to the schools and et cetera, I think, there's benefit to that. And there's probably purchasing benefits. As you get higher in licenses, license fees goes down, that sort of thing, so.
I haven't had this conversation yet with the school, so I can't say what the direction will be there. But they are able to get Google licenses because they're school educational purposes where we can't. So there's definitely a financial benefit for them going with the Google platform, especially with their user platform with the Chromebooks and, versus the town. That's a cost for every single Google license.
I think they can get it on Office as the 365 as well.
I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
I am aware that they can with Google.
Because I know my college kids can get that for free with their .edu addresses. So, yeah, I mean, if it's not, then we should look at it, the other way as well. It seems that it would be better if everyone's on the same platform, including the risk aspect to it, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I guess this is a chicken and egg conversation, right? And we've had this conversation via email, and there, myself and Mr. Menard work in technology. I'm not a municipal technology expert. I don't know what the prevailing good stuff is out there or even practices around municipal technology. I've got a background in networking. I've got a background in security. I've got a background in risk management. I've got a background in fraud. But none of that has much to do with how you manage IT in a municipality. But as a slightly more than casual observer, what I've seen is, we've got a mixture, like many organizations do. It's a hybrid environment of a lot of physical hardware, a lot of stuff that we're, paying as we go up in the cloud. No real coordinated identity or access management plan, no comprehensive security evaluation. We've got a school department that's very much connected to this, that is in the last year probably signed up for 12 new applications. I don't know if there's a standard operating procedure for evaluating those applications, looking at security, anything like that. I'm just struck by the lack of comprehensive or strategic thinking going into our IT environment. And I'm saying this without a full understanding, because most of the questions that I've asked along the way haven't been answered. So you could very easily come back to me and say, no, you're wrong. And I would say, okay, well, please show me, because there are so many things that haven't been answered. And I just feel as if, we're at a point where, quite frankly, maybe a one-for-one replacement for the IT director is not the answer. Maybe we need to bring in some outside short-term expertise to help us build that plan, and then something to create a roadmap to execute upon. But again, without the knowledge or expertise of people who have done this successfully in municipal environments before, I don't feel qualified to say we should do this, or here's a suggestion or that, other than, in my mind, we're clearly lacking a strategy. And I've said this to the previous IT director, I've said this to you, I'm scared to death of a cyber attack. We've seen them all over the place. We just had one in Peterborough a couple of weeks ago. It was a highly targeted attack on Peterborough, and we'd be crazy to think that we're immune to that kind of thing. And I feel like this should be a priority for the town.
Well, I can tell you it is my priority.
Good.
One of the highest. And it's part of my thinking going, forward, to get a full assessment of what we have existing, what we need to make improvements on, and to put a plan in place to address all of it.
Good. Well, looking forward to continuing that conversation.
Yeah, and just one other thing popped in my mind in this discussion. IT often now comes with the policies and procedures and everything, workflow that goes through it, right? We're all digital. In one board doing something one way, another board another way, another board another way, one town, organization doing it yet a different. You got to kind of start to think about, like, are we all open meeting law compliant in the way that we're sharing documentation, and and what are the policies and procedures and safeguards that an IT solution could put in place so that we don't run afoul of that. And then even beyond that, to me, open government actually means that as we're discussing documentation here, that anyone at home or in the audience should have that same information in front of them. So, how do we additionally push that information out to the public if they're interested in it? So it's, and we don't even fall into the case where, oh, hey, 3 months ago, I don't know the statute on it, but the statute of limitations, but you had a document, go retrieve it, and you're like, I can't find it, right? So records management and all that kind of stuff would, so inconsistency in
We'll
that.
talk about that at next meeting,
Okay.
when I get to be on the hot seat on that.
All right.
Again, a quick question. Moving to a single platform, and this is from having no expertise whatsoever in IT. Going to one platform, my logic tells me that makes you more vulnerable.
Not necessarily.
Having one platform?
Well, the desire to move all departments of the today. In any case, there will be numbers associated with both of those articles, I'm sure, by the public hearing date. So that's pretty much it on that. We are,
Can I ask a question on that one?
if I could finish up first. We've got the next 3 meetings scheduled, and they're fairly close to, we're going to take a 2-week break, and then there's 3 that are pretty much on top of each other. So it gives the architectural firm a 2-week period to do their dive into this part of the project. And so then those next 3 weeks after that, we'll be meeting to discuss their question. We've sent them some information from our deliberations. We're hoping to get some questions back from them and do the back and forth very quickly so that everything can be in place by the public hearing. Yes.
So for the 2 moneyed articles going to special town meeting, is the vote threshold different because it's special town meeting than annual town meeting?
Yes, it is. Not for both, though, is it? Just for 2? Any funding article. Okay, so yes, the second and third articles that will be on the warrant will be a 2/3 majority rather than a simple majority. Heather, how about on exempted borrowing at annual town meeting? Isn't that 2/3 also? Yeah.
I believe
okay.
it is.
Yeah, so exempted borrowing, which would be on the second article, it doesn't matter which town meeting it goes to, but it does affect the third one, excuse me.
And then we would have how many days to hold a 90 days?
90 days. It'd have to be, if Article 2 is approved, we'd have to have a ballot within 90 days, special election.
Okay.
That's it for TCP. Green Communities met before this meeting this evening. We're working on an RFQ for the, I've drawn a blank, design. Well, yeah, there's some question as to whether we can do a design-build RFQ, and that's got to be answered before we can move forward with what we want to propose for the April grant round. We're hoping we can do both simultaneously. Otherwise, we've been initially told that it would have to be 2 separate grants and possibly 2 separate grant rounds. So we're trying to get clarification on that at this point. So if we can do a design build, then we can do it all as pretty much one package, and then we'd also be looking at a project manager
Or,
for the install. The LED streetlights. And I also mentioned to the committee tonight that we had the discussion with the fire chief about the public safety building, so that, just that they'd be aware that, we all need to be looking for opportunities there if they exist in that April grant round. And finally, capital planning is kicking off next Tuesday, our first meeting of the budget season. That's about all I have on that, except for the fact that we do have an at-large seat open on that committee. So anybody, any registered voter in the town, I believe that's required, is eligible to put in a talent bank form for that position.
And that's appointed by the moderator?
Yes.
Okay. Any other committee reports?
Do you know how many
No.
years are on that term? Is that a 3-year term?
Yes.
Capital planning is 3, yeah. And I'm not sure, but is that a resignation partway through a term, or no? It's not, okay. I couldn't remember. I know who it was, I just didn't remember what the...
The school committee met last week. The superintendent and the school business manager will be at our next meeting. So we'll have the opportunity to have a discussion with them, as well as review of all of the general administration functions under the town manager. The town manager will be discussing that with us next week. Back to school committee, there was a relevant conversation that we ought to be just, I think, plugged into and aware of regarding the busing contract. So we are in the third year of a 3-year bus contract that has 2 renewal options on it. So we are coming upon a decision point as to whether we are going to exercise the renewal option or rebid the contract. The rub is that the renewal option is 9%, which is pretty substantial when you consider the amount of money that we spend on busing. So they did not make a decision on it at the last meeting. I believe it will be an agenda item for their next meeting. But I would anticipate that, and I don't know the details in terms of when that renewal option needs to be exercised or not, but I think there will likely be some exploration about rebidding that contract.
Do you know, is there a special bus capacity in place right now?
Yeah, so that actually came up in the conversation really briefly. But the net is that we basically are currently contracted for a specific number of buses. And that limits us, for example, I'm sure if you've followed on social media, there's been lots of talk about, people who are on that 1.5 mile bubble and getting a seat on a bus and that sort of thing.
He's let me back into Zoom. We had a system crash.
Oh, okay. The Zoom is down. Okay. You're back on?
Recording in progress.
We're back on. I lost my train of thought. Buses.
Capacity.
Yeah, so seating capacity, we're really limited by number of buses right now. We have basically a hard cap on buses. I don't know how many there are. But effectively, there's only so many kids you can put on a certain number of buses if you're making 2 runs a day. So there has been some discussion about, in a potential new bid, is that something that we might be able to facilitate greater flexibility? And I don't know the answer to that, obviously, but I think that it at least was brought up by Mr. Cassidy. And, I would imagine that's something we can discuss in a couple of weeks when they come.
If I could make a very quick comment about that process. A number of years ago, the bus contract was up for renewal, and an entity came to the school committee and said, we're going to bid on this, but there's no need for the number of buses that you're proposing in the contract. And ultimately, they came up with a low number with less buses, and they had already done their homework, and it worked out fine. So putting a cap on or specifying the number of buses in a contract, I think, is shooting yourself in the foot, honestly.
Well, you're also limited by the willingness of the company that is making the bid, right? So there's a substantial investment that one makes when they put a bus on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a trivial amount of money. This is what came up last year with this partial payment issue that was very controversial. These are huge expenses. And, we just went through a massive building boom that, we did see nominal increases in our school enrollment over the last few years. Not substantial, but, we find ourselves in another 3-year contract, and all of a sudden we've got more houses going in on the outskirts of town or large developments, and, those are things that I think we need to be thinking about. So, yeah, I believe me, I haven't given it enough thought in terms of, nor will I, in terms of, do we contract for number of kids or population or buses, but suffice to say, right now, we're clearly in a situation where we're not able to deliver, we're able to meet the policies that we have had in place for a long time, but we're not able to deliver the level of service that we were able to deliver even a couple of years ago because of the COVID restrictions and those kinds of things in terms of how many kids you can get on a bus and that sort of thing, right? So that's put us in a bind a little bit in terms of what we can offer for services, particularly, again, for those people that are on that 1.5-mile bubble.
Yeah, and, I mean, it's obviously for the school committee to decide the policy that they want, and maybe you're gonna look at it, but, you know, if you are walking, I don't care if it's a 1/2 mile or 1.5 miles, it should be a safe walk.
Yeah,
And I'm okay with kids walking. I mean, I used to walk to school, right, and just, but it should be a safe walk, you know, so it should not only be a, 1.5 miles, but there should always be a, sidewalks and, safe crossing if needed and that sort of thing.
yeah, and I've spoken with the superintendent about this, and, I think that deference is given to those situations when they've had to make some, onesie-twosie calls over the course of the last couple of years on that, where there are people that live within that 1.5-mile radius that it's a dangerous walk, and obviously we need to be cognizant of that, and those are management decisions more than policy decisions, I think, but I think the policy needs to account for it.
Yeah, the policy could account for it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other committee reports? Hearing none. Any public comment from the board? Any public comment from the public? Items for future meetings. So I did make the announcement about Tracy O'Connell-Novick on the 28th of October. Our September 23rd meeting, we are inviting the superintendent and the town manager for discussions similar to what we've been having. We do have a fifth Thursday in September, on September 30th, which I wanted to bring to the attention of the board. I don't right now see a need to meet on September 30th, but I do want to make you aware of it. And if there's special town meeting stuff or whatever, we can certainly call an audible even at our next meeting. But right now, I'm not planning to have a meeting on the 30th, which will bring our next meeting after that to October 14th, which is the special town meeting public hearing.
Speaking of that, on our old, I just noticed this on the minutes that we just approved.
Mhm.
We listed as the next meeting is November 4th.
Oh, well, that's an easy fix.
As long as you're okay with me fixing it.
I'll make that fix.
Okay.
I'll make a special chairman's decision to fix that.
Just
I was counting
since it's
on
gonna,
Or we could go back and revisit the minutes, but I don't.
because it's gonna go out and be posted.
Just the meeting might be.
That is the 14th.
The 14th.
So we'll have to have a discussion about how we want to handle that, but it's easy to just open and close with the same chair. I think it'd probably be
No, that's
fine
fine.
if
I was
you
just
chair that
making
meeting.
sure which
Yeah,
one I got.
yeah. So my situation is I have a work meeting at 6, which is hard stopped at 7, but I'll probably be 10 or 15 minutes late. So
You want a police escort?
if I could, that'd be great. I'll call it chief. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You